is a recap of what we learned in class on Friday. And I'm going to be using the worksheet that's in week 7. So if you missed class on Friday, now is your chance. I'm going to do the whole blessed worksheet. So let's start with Gaussian blur. This is a drop shadow. And if I go to my, Chi for transparency, as we have learned, I am using this multiply blend mode and I'm using opacity, and there's a gradient in here. Now, little by little, what's happening, the more you learn, the more you use. And so this is a good example of that. So we're using a gradient from light to dark. We've got a blend mode, we've got opacity. Let's add one more thing. Let's go to effect and go to blur. Gaussian blur. Gaussian was a French mathematician. The higher the blur, the softer it becomes. And please notice that I have the preview button on. So there is my blurred shadow, right? And it's becoming a little more lifelike with every one of these special techniques that I add. If I wanted to edit this blur, I would not go back to effect blur. Watch what happens. I get an error message saying, this will apply another instance of the blur. I will essentially have 2 blurs attached to this piece, and that's not what I want. I want to edit the existing blur. So I'm going to hit cancel. This is what I want, appearance. It's here in the window under A for appearance. And if you look at it, it's telling me this is the fill. It's a gradient. Let's see the little gradient. This is the effect that I have applied, the Gaussian blur, and here's the opacity. The appearance window basically tells you everything you need to know. And in this case, if I double click on Gaussian blur, I go back to edit. Okay, so that's important. Don't just go back to the effect menu and reapply the effect. You will essentially be applying 2 effects to the same item. You won't be editing the first effect. So you want to edit your Gaussian blur, you come over here. All right. Now, there are a number of other filters that you can use. Let's keep going. Here you see I have, I changed this from the sheet. The sheet, there's a gradient in here. I made this all the same solid color so you can see this. This is called a stylized filter. So again, if I go to effect and I go to stylize, I'm going to try inner glow first. Here's the inner glow window. I'm going to choose a nice dark color. And I'm going to choose multiply. And you can see now, this is kind of a down and dirty way of, if I make the blur more, and I can change the opacity to let a little bit more of the purple through, or I can make it darker. I can make this color, I'm going to go for more of a purple on purple effect. But that's a super quick way to make it look like the circle is being punched out of whatever's here. I'll change the fill color to a slightly darker color. Now it really looks like this is being recessed. Things that are darker look like they're moving away from you. Things that are lighter look like they're coming towards you. So again, I can switch it off here in the appearance menu if I want to. Or I can throw it away entirely. Or I can edit it. I double click on it. Oh, pardon me. So, there are a number of other effects. I encourage you to go into the stylized menu and play around. So you have an outer glow. And again, for some reason the default is screen. But if you wanted something like a nice soft glow, let me make this a lighter color so it pops. Similar to a drop shadow, but all the way around the perimeter of the thing. Throw that away. I could do a drop shadow. Now, I tend to not use these drop shadows, but if you want a down and dirty, very quick drop shadow, here is the opacity. This is the offset. Remember that everything you do is on a great big XY axis, and so the larger this number, the further away it goes. You can choose the color, you can choose the blur. Just make sure the preview button is on and you can play around with all of these things. All right. I prefer to make my own drop shadows using the blend mode. I prefer to do, finger on the option key. I prefer to, see that? And then I multiply it and I change the opacity and I blur it out. I'm fussy and I'm old. I happen to think that's a better looking drop shadow. But if you want to use the automatic shadow, that if you're in a hurry, that is your prerogative. I tend to use outer glow or drop shadow if I have type that's against a background and I want it to be more readable. That's where that effect comes into play for me. A couple of others. So we have inner glow, outer glow, drop shadow. Scribble is kind of a ridiculous one that you can use. And depending on how you set it, I don't know who came up with this, but if you wanted to fill an enormous amount of space, this is not a bad effect to use. You can take a solid and turn it into a bunch of scribbles. I don't think I've ever used this in my life, but it's there for you if you need it. All right. And again, I just want to remind you, if you want to edit any of these styles, these effects as you put them in, don't go back to the style menu. If you try and do it again, it's going to say to you, you already have it applied. You don't want to put effects on effects. You want to do it here in the appearance menu. I can edit it. I can hide it. I can throw it away. All right. So that's the first page of the sheet, using filters. Let's go on to adding texture. To add a grain texture, you're going to apply a filter on top of your color. So I'm going to grab this colored box and I'm going to copy it. Sorry, edit, copy. And I'm going to do paste in front. I want them exactly on top of each other. So I have two of these now. I undo and put them back together. And I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to come down here to Texture, and I'm going to use Grain. All right, let me go get that. It's on my other screen. And we get this very complicated sub window that kind of shows me what's going on. And you can kind of see what's going on here. But instead of grain, I'm going to use graphic pen. And you can see it looks like the short kind of cross hatching of a graphic pen. And I can edit the stroke length. I can edit the light and darkness to kind of texturize this however I want to. I can change the stroke direction. I encourage you to play around with all of these things. So I'm getting this kind of crunchy, almost like fur kind of pattern. I'm going to hit OK. Now, this isn't helpful, right? Because it's completely opaque and not the color that I want. That's where the transparency and the blend modes come in. I can multiply it and then play with the transparency. I can use overlay. Notice it gets lighter when I do overlay and darker when I do multiply. And again, depending on what you choose, the colors that you choose and the grain texture that you choose, a lot is going to depend on that. But then if you wanted to have fun, go ahead and move through some of these blend modes and you can see different colors and different grain textures act differently, act in different ways. So go ahead and go in there and play around. This is just a way to add texture. If you have something that's a big flat of black color, excuse me, of solid color, and you wanted to change it up, this is one way to do it. And if your texture, if you are playing with texture, let me go back. I'm going to go to Appearance. I'm going to double click on Graphic Pen. Let's say I wanted to use something else. You notice some of these work and some of these don't. So what you might need to do is change the color of the box on top. Try changing it to a 50% gray. If you click on something like this, glass, and it doesn't work, try filling it with something else and see what that gets you. All right? but you can go in and play with these things. See, not everything works the same way. So I can go in here, play with the opacity. So you can add a little texture to things the easy way, which is using the grain tool. All right? Let's keep going. Now, this is how to add texture with photography. Let's say you have a photograph of a piece of shattered glass, or in this case, a dot screen. This is a JPEG that I got off of Adobe Image Search, right? This is a stock photograph. We are going to use the image trace tool. So we're going to use the image trace tool 2 different ways. Here's the first way to do it. You go to Object, Image Trace, Make and Expand. And you get this error message that says, this is going to take a long time because this is a really complex image. And you say, I don't care, just do it. And as you can see, if you see how it turns blue, that's because every single dot has been rendered into a path, and the paths are lit up. The paths have been selected. And so you can see, if I go into Command Y, this is all vector now. It's all been auto-traced. All right, let me back up. Now the only problem with this is, in addition to the dark parts, the image trace tool also traced the white background. I need to select the white background and get rid of it. To do that, I'm going to use a tool we haven't used before. It's up here. It's called the Magic Wand. You may have to look around for it in your toolbox, but it looks like, oddly enough, a magic wand. It's right here. So I'm going to take the Magic Wand tool, and I'm going to click on the white. Magic Wand tool automatically selects within a group every instance of the color that you click on. And so I clicked on the white. So it looks like the whole thing is selected. It's not. Just the white has been selected. And if I hit the delete key and I go in now, you can see I don't have a background. All I have are these dark areas. So let me go back. And this is all one vector. It's a compound path. I'm going to take my eyedropper and sample the color from this dark pink. Now it's dark pink. I'm going to put this on top. I'm going to put my finger on the Shift key, scale it down. And again, this is where the blend modes come into view. If I multiply it, it gets darker. If I overlay it, it gets lighter. And I can play with my transparency tools. I can play with all of this to try and get the kind of effect that I want. So if you have a texture that you've picked up, maybe you walked by a brick wall and you really like the texture of the brick wall, so you took a picture of it. You can bring that picture in and you can sample that texture. You can also use these textures inside your letter forms. So I'm going to go get my direct selection tool. This started out its life as a capital I in the typeface called Musea. I converted it to outline. With the direct selection tool, this won't work if you use the regular selection tool. You notice that draw inside is grayed out. But if I take my direct selection tool and I click right on the path, not in the path, on the path, then I can turn on draw inside. I can cut this. I can grab the eye. Remember to grab the eye. Some of you are forgetting to do that in class. And you can say paste. And there it is. And I can grab it, finger on the Shift key. And again, I can play with whatever I want to play with. I can change the blend mode however I want to change the blend mode. I can do it normal. I can multiply it. I can change the opacity. This texture now is simply another object inside my Illustrator file. All right, let's keep going. Let's add texture with pattern. So before you see 3 pattern tiles. So they're just little clumps of leaves. I used these 3 pattern tiles. I used the pattern tool to create 3 different patterns. So I grabbed this clump of leaves and I went to Object, Pattern, Make. And it says, okay, Chris, I put this pattern in there. And I'm like, great. It's actually already in there, but let's do it again. And then I played with the pattern on the grid. I moved the leaves closer together. If I make these numbers, see how it says 85 by 71? If I do, for example, 65 by 51, you'll notice that the leaves are getting even closer together. They're creating this very, very tight pattern. So I already have these patterns in here, so I can lay this pattern on top of this pattern. And that becomes a little more complicated, a little different. But if I really want it to be different, I can take my rotate tool. And you might remember that if you put your finger on the Option key, you get this little call box that gives you a lot of control over how you rotate. So I can rotate the pattern. If I come in here and turn this box off, I don't want to rotate the box that the pattern is in. I only want to rotate the pattern. And I've got my preview button on so I can see what's happening. So now I've got the leaves kind of going every which way. Oops. I can come and get this box and lay it on top. And then for this one, because the leaves are all kind of offset, this time I'm going to go get the scale tool. Option, click. Don't transform the object, only transform the pattern. Let's make it 30% larger. Things that are closer to you are larger. Things that are further away from you are smaller. And so if I take this little bundle of 3 patterns and lay it here, now I'm starting to get somewhere. Now it has a little bit of depth, it has a little bit of variety, and I can play with it. All right, all of these instructions are right here in the sheet. So go ahead and give this a try. The last one I'll do, I made a separate video for image trace that's up in the thing. So the last thing I'll do, I was asked a question, how do I fill the space with feathers? Well, there's a way to do that that doesn't involve the pattern tool. You can use the blend tool. We talked about the blend tool with gradients. Here's a way to do it with shapes. Watch this. Object. So I'm going to set my blend. I want my blend to be specified steps. Let's say I want 5 feathers in between this space. I'm going to do this one because feathers tend to go along, they align to the path rather than align to the page. So I want them to all kind of bow together like feathers. And I go now, and so now I've set the blend. Now I have to make the blend. There's my blend. And you say, well, that looks terrible. It looks like teeth. It doesn't look like anything. Well, that's fine. But you see that blend path right there? That's a path, like any other path you've ever worked with. So if I go get my pen tool, I can start adding points to this path. And then if I go get my direct selection tool and I click just on the path, I can start editing those points. I have to be careful. It's a little fiddly, but I can do it. So I can move this stuff down. I'll put one more right in the middle. You say, that's okay. I don't love it. It needs a little fussing. And I agree with you. It absolutely does. So using the direct selection tool, I'm going to kind of jockey these into place. It's all right. I mean, I do have this little fillip here that I got to get rid of. So if I grab this and I go to Object, Expand, and I say I want to expand everything, the object, the fill, the stroke. Now I no longer have a blend. This is not a blend anymore. You notice that they're each their own thing. So if I come in now with my direct selection tools and I just click on the crossbar, I can delete. So I can edit these paths now because they're now all independent paths. Oops. Gotta be careful. No. See, it's a little fiddly. There we go. That took a minute. But if I wanted to now, they're all independent paths. They're not locked together in the blend. So I can go in and edit them. I can make them all a little bit uneven if I wanted to. And then once I've got that, they're still all grouped together. So I can grab this one and pull it down, grab this one and pull it down, and I can bring them on top of each other. Object, arrange, bring to front. And pretty quickly I can create this pattern. Obviously I would tuck these feathers underneath the wing. And then here's one more quick thing that we went over in class. See how these feathers aren't going in the right direction anymore? I can distort them using the warp tool. So I'll try the arc. I want them to arc out. I can play with these tools. And kind of warp them using the arc tool. Oh, give it a second. There we go. So, see that I warped them to the point. Let me bring them to the front. They're too far in the back for you to see. See that? So, play with these tools. You can see them, they're here. Play with these tools if you want to add texture, if you want to add a little bit of visual interest, if you have a space, a large amount of area that you want to fill in with. Use the filters if you want to add depth, if you want things to look more realistic, if you want to add a blur. If you have questions, let me know.